Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli here. Welcome to a brand new episode of In the Shop. And I've got a great topic for you today. And it is Carolina rig versus Texas rig. For sure, two of the most popular rigging methods for soft plastics like worms and lizards. Carolina rig and Texas rig. They're both great rigging systems, but there are definite advantages to using a Carolina rig versus a Texas rig, or a Texas rig versus a C rig in certain situations. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. Let's start with the Carolina rig. And I want to show you this rig just in case you don't know what a Carolina rig is, and talk to you about how easy this bait is to fish. And it's one of the beauties of a Carolina rig is how simple it is to fish it. And if you look at a Carolina rig, they also call this the ball and chain because you've got a sliding weight above a barrel swivel, and then you've got a leader length with your bait in the back. And I want to tell you a little bit about this setup. Let's start with the weight. You can use any kind of weight that's out there, from a worm weight, a bullet style weight, to an egg sinker, or the one that I love for Carolina rig, and this is the one that's one of my favorites, it's a barrel style weight. This one's a VMC barrel tungsten weight. And the reason I love that style weight, look at it, it gets through cover very cleanly, whether it's grass, or if it's scattered wood or brush, even in a gravelly small rock bottom, that cylinder style tungsten weight goes through very, very well. The other reason I like tungsten versus lead is tungsten is super hard, it's dense, and it's going to help transmit that feel a lot better, okay? So your weight in the front, followed by a little bead. And this is an 8mm plastic bead. And I get a lot of questions, why plastic? You know, I used to use glass, but because tungsten is so hard, when that tungsten hits glass, it'll damage the glass and then it'll affect your line. So an 8mm plastic bead that's going to protect your knot, and it's also going to give it some sound. You can hear that right there. Next component is a barrel or a crane swivel. I think this is a size 10. I like a black swivel. It's really your connector point between your main line and your leader. And then finally, a length of leader to your hook and weight. On leader, here's my two rules on leader. One is I always like to go down one line size from my main line on my leader. So if my main line is 20, I'll use 17 or 15 leader. If my main line is 15, I'll go down to 12 or 10 leader. And I go a little lighter because if you do snag this bait, you snag it into, say, a brush pile. When you go to break it off, your leader will break before your main line, and you'll get that expensive tungsten weight back. The second thing is length of leader. And my rule for length of leader is I like to pick a leader length that floats just above the cover. So depending on what kind of cover you're fishing, you can alter your leader length. If it's sandgrass that's only 6 or 8 inches off the top, you can go with a shorter leader. If they're brush piles or stumps or logs that are a couple feet off the bottom, you can lengthen your leader. The other thing on leader length is the clearer the water, the longer the leader, the dirtier water, the shorter the leader, okay? Last but not least, your hook. I like to use a little bit smaller than normal hook when I'm Carolina rigging to help let that bait have natural action. I'm usually using a 2 or a 3/0 VMC offset hook, and any of your favorite plastics, but for sure, this is one of my favorites, which is a lizard. This is a Berkeley Power Lizard. Reason I love that thing, it's got a flat bottom. It glides really well. All right, there's your Carolina rig, and you want to use a Carolina rig versus a Texas rig in two different scenarios. We're going to talk about them right now. The first one is for Carolina rigging. The first one is we want to use it when the bottom is more horizontal, okay? We want to use it when the bottom is more horizontal. And so I'm going to do some really crude drawings here, but I want to show you why a Carolina rig works better. If you're fishing a bottom contour that has a very gradual slope, just like that, a Carolina rig definitely outperforms a Texas rig because it's a very varied, slow surface that goes down. And a Carolina rig is more of a search rig than a target rig. So for flats, for depth changes that are very gradual, for slow tapering points, for bank fishing, when the pond or the lake has a slow tapering bottom, you want the Carolina rig. The second scenario for a Carolina rig versus a Texas rig is when there's sparse cover or you can't see the cover with your eyes. So on the same horizontal bottom, here it goes, you might have just a little tiny patch of grass and you don't really know where that grass is at. Or you've got maybe one boulder way out off that slow tapering bottom. And it's something you can't see with your eyes, right? You don't know where that cover's at, or it's just sparse, there's not a lot of stuff down there. Perfect scenario for a Carolina rig. Because remember, that Carolina rig, you're dragging that thing. And that weight, like a ball and chain, is pulling it slowly along that horizontal bottom. And you're going to find that isolated cover because of that bigger tungsten weight. You'll feel it. And when you feel that cover, stop the drag, let the bait settle to the bottom, and that's when the fish are going to bite. So Carolina rig plastics for when you have a slower tapering, more horizontal bottom, and you have sparse, non-specific cover, okay? Perfect scenario for a Carolina rig. Now let's talk about the Texas rig. Another amazing way to rig your plastics. And again, I want to talk about it a little bit, and then we'll tell you when to fish this thing. Texas rig is super, super basic. Just a couple components you need to know about. The first one is a bobber stop or a weight stop. And it's just a little sort of rubber, little bead looking thing that you put on your line. And this is going to help that weight from sliding too far up. And you could actually use it to keep that weight pegged to the head of the bait, okay? So a bobber stop or a weight stop. This is the large size weight stop by VMC. The next one is your weight. And for Texas rigging, I'm always going to use that bullet weight style sinker. Once again, this is tungsten. This is a VMC tungsten weight. I'll fish anywhere from an 1/8 ounce all the way up to a 1/2 ounce. 5/16, 3/8 are probably two of my favorite weight sizes. And once again, this VMC worm weight is tungsten. And tungsten's hard, it's dense, it's going to let me get in that cover and feel around. Next is hook size. Hook size a little bit bigger on the Texas rig. On a Carolina rig, we use a little bit smaller hook. On a Texas rig, we're going to use a little bit bigger hook. And depending on the size of the worm, I like to use a 4/0, a 5/0, sometimes even a 6/0 on a big 10-inch worm like this. Texas rigging, you could rig any style plastic you want. Soft stick bait, a creature, anything you want. But for sure, one of my favorite Texas rigging baits is a good old school Berkeley power worm. This is a ribbon tail. They make it in about 4 or 5 different sizes. This is one of my favorites. This is an 8.5. I also like the 10-inch worm. This is a color called Blue Fleck, which is great. So there's your basic Texas rig. And if you look at it, you know, we're going to rig that worm so it stays nice and straight. And if you look at it, you can tell right away that this bait is going to be better than a Carolina rig for specific situations. So let's talk about that. So just like a Carolina rig was perfect when the bottom is horizontal and the cover sparse, for a Texas rig, we're going to change that, okay? And on this one, a Texas rig is better when the bottom is vertical. When the bottom depth, when the bottom structure and contour is more vertical, that's when you want to use a Texas rig. So let's do a vertical bottom. And I'll show you the bottom coming off the bank, and then we've got a big drop off, and maybe even another drop off toward the bottom. So you can see that horizontal slow taper for a Carolina rig. Now look at this. Now we've got a very steep taper to the bottom. We've got a vertical drop on the bottom. Look at that. Very vertical, very steep drop on that bottom. And the Texas rig is going to excel when you have that steeper drop. The second part to a Texas rig versus a Carolina rig is when you have specific target cover, okay? So let's do one here where, look at this. We've got a boat dock sitting right here on this brake line. We've got a boat dock, right? And on that deep brake, that guy that lives at that house planted a giant brush pile at the bottom of that brake. Or out here, you know, we might have a bridge that crosses, bridge pilings. Or maybe it's a bluff, a specific piece of cover. We can see it with our eyes. We can see it with our depth finder. We know where that cover's at every time. And because the Texas rig has that weight pegged, it's going to do a much better job of targeting that specific cover that's deeper and more vertical. So I could take this Texas rig worm, I could pitch it around the dock, I could lob cast it around this brush pile, I could throw it out at that bridge piling or along that bluff because it's vertical bottom and it's specific cover. Listen to me, both of these rigging techniques are techniques that you have to learn. If you fish soft plastics, you have to know both of them. Keep these tips in mind. And when you're Carolina rigging, when you're using the old ball and chain, horizontal bottom, less specific cover, more isolated, random cover, Carolina rig's perfect. Vertical drop, deep, straight, drop off to deep water with specific cover, throw a Texas rig. Try these two techniques. I guarantee you're going to get more bites. Listen, if you like what you're watching right now, do me a favor. Stop, take a second, mash that subscribe button down there. If you're already subscribed, do me a favor. Tell a buddy to subscribe to Mike Iaconelli Fishing Channel. We've got a lot more great content coming at you. Good luck and good fishing.